The next bill we're going to hear is House Bill 7297 by Representative Ajello.
Thank you. Good evening. It's a long night in Judiciary Committee tonight, too, as Representative Canario can tell you. 7297, the Lila Sapinsley Compassionate Care Act, is something that I've introduced now for the past 3 years with my Senator Gail Golden. Lila Sapinsley was a Rhode Island senator. She was a Republican, and I think the first minority leader female. Lila Sapinsley was my senator for a while, and then I was her representative for a while. In her last year, she and I were at an event where the idea of physician assistance in dying was discussed. After the speaker, Lila approached me and asked me if I would think of introducing this legislation in Rhode Island. I said yes. Lila Sapinsley died in December of that year, and in January, Gail Golden and I introduced the legislation and decided that we would name it after her. This legislation would allow, in very, very specified circumstances, would allow a physician to make a prescription for the patient, a prescription for a drug that would result in the patient's death. In very specific circumstances, the patient has to have a prognosis of death within 6 months. The patient has to make a request of the physician 2 times, at least 15 days apart, for this prescription. The patient has to make that request in writing. The physician has to make sure that the patient understands that they can rescind the request at any time. The patient then signs that request with 2 witnesses, one of whom cannot in any way benefit by the person's death. So this is someone who, with a prognosis of death within 6 months, this is a person who the physician and another physician deem capable of making this decision. A person who, with a prognosis of death, to hasten that death by taking a prescription if and when they want to. This legislation is now law in, I believe, 6 states. Was first Oregon, now Colorado, California, Montana, Vermont, Washington, the state of Washington, and the District of Washington, D.C. As I said, we've introduced the legislation several times before. There are people that you and I may imagine that might want to do this or might anticipate wanting to do this, but it's not going to take them into consideration. A friend of mine had a stroke this year. He had quite a difficult time recovering from the stroke in the hospital. He's now up and walking around, but he has great fear that the next stroke will leave him really incapacitated. He is in support of legislation like this, but recognizes that it probably won't work for him, because at the point that he is so incapacitated that he cannot speak, that he cannot get his hand to his mouth, it wouldn't work for him. He doesn't now have a prognosis of 6 months to live. He doesn't know, in fact, that he'll ever have another stroke. And he's not going to get 6 months notice that it's coming and it's going to be so debilitating. My own father died of Alzheimer's disease. He was a intelligent man and with an inquiring mind, and a lot of pride in his personal well-being and ability to care for himself. My brother and I learned that he had Alzheimer's disease and first really understood it. He was a chemical engineer, but his hobby was building furniture. And in preparing to build a piece of furniture, he would do scale model drawings, three-dimensional drawings. With my father with the doctor, when the doctor was asking him questions to determine whether he had Alzheimer's disease or not. My father was asked to draw a three-dimensional cube, and he couldn't do it. My father would not have wanted to spiral into debility such that he didn't know how to walk anymore at the end. His body was quite strong, but he couldn't move, he couldn't get his body to do what he wanted it to. But by the time he had Alzheimer's disease, he wouldn't have fit this category. He wouldn't have been able to say to the doctor, I want this prescription. This is not something that's going to work for everybody, even probably for a majority of the people that we know and might want to help them have a less painful last 6 months or last 3 months. It has been in the states where it is allowed, in Oregon, particularly because they're the longest. It's not been used by even, I think, half of the people who have requested the prescriptions and gotten the prescriptions. But it has provided them comfort in knowing I can end this if I want to. I can end this tomorrow. That's what we're asking to do. Again, I believe that there are protections such that no one will be forced into doing this, that they not be a burden on anybody else. That's very important to me. I don't want to be doing that to people. But I do want to give people, like perhaps myself, the potential comfort of knowing if it gets too painful, I don't have to go into a morphine-induced coma until my body stops working. I can end it more quickly. That's what I'm asking for. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Yes, Representative.
Chairwoman Ajello, the 15-day, you have to ask once, wait 15 days, and ask again?
Yes.
And this is why you're healthy? I mean, you've already been diagnosed.
This is after the diagnosis, but 15 days apart, so that you've clearly had time to think about it.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
It's not a snap decision, I want this.
Yes, I was just wondering if there was...
Thank you. Did you have a question?
I don't think there's any magic to the
Representative-
15 days, though.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you. Who is this bill targeting?
This is, well, I don't like the term targeting. I think this bill is hoping to give comfort to people who have a prognosis of less than 6 months to live and do not want to spend their last time in extreme pain, in extreme discomfort, perhaps so drug debilitated by morphine to hide the pain, that they're not really alive anyhow. It is to allow people like that to hasten their dying by taking a drug that will bring that on quickly.
Yeah, I think that your bill is well-intended. I think what I'm concerned about is the expansion of this kind of policy, because I know that I'm hearing that Belgium's law has expanded to euthanize children, and those who are incompetent and people who are not dying at all. In Canada, who recently passed it, has already expanded it to prisoners. Are you aware of that?
I am not aware, and none of that is at all my intention.
Okay, because
None
I
of
just
that
think it's
is at all my intention. Not children, not prisoners, not anyone who is incapacitated in any way that would make them not able to make the decision themselves. It should be the patient themselves making the decision.
yeah. I think it's a slippery slope. Do you know that there are other states who have reversed this as well?
Reverse this? No.
Reversed this. Okay. Okay. There have been. But anyway,
I would be very, my understanding is Portland was, Oregon was first, Colorado, California, Vermont, Montana, the state of Washington, and Washington, D.C. I haven't heard of any states reversing it.
Okay, I know I've heard it. I'm just not. I can't really definitively say which one or ones. But but thank you.
Representative Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Ajello, I've been trying to read it real quickly. It's very in-depth and everything, which is good, but I don't see anything where there is a provision for family input. If, let's say, an offspring or a sibling of the terminally ill patient objects to it, thinking that there is still chances that they could have down the road comfort of life for a while longer, I don't see any. Is there any provision in here for family input at all?
There is nothing in this legislation compelling the patient to consider wishes of family. We would certainly hope that family would be a part of the discussion, and that is a part of the reason for the 15 days, I believe. But unless the patient is incapacitated and has been found to be incapacitated and not capable of making their own decisions, to me it would not make sense to put in law that a family member has authority to interrupt this process.
Okay, the other part was not just to interrupt the process, but to have the discussion. There could be times when a patient wouldn't even consult an offspring or a sibling or a spouse and make the decision on their own. Is there a way that you can put into this bill that says that the patient has to sign off that they did have discussions with their family, so at least they're aware of what's going on?
I would absolutely not be willing to put that into the legislation. That would, people don't always have good relationships with their children, with their siblings. You might have an estranged couple that for whatever reason are still married, but don't speak to each other and don't have regard for each other. Absolutely not, I'm sorry to say.
That's fine. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other questions? Thank you, Representative.